AJ, to his credit, he tried to right the ship. He got rid of his previous trainer. He came and got one of the great trainers from the United States, Robert Garcia, a former champion himself. Yo, this is Trav with Yo Trav Sports Bag, and I'm back at it again today with you, and I'm getting into some sports. I know it's been some time since I've last made a recording about any sport, but that sport was boxing. Well, the same old thing. The more things change, the more they stay the same. We're going to talk about some boxing again. I'm going to be doing a little bit more these days because sports is upon us. Not just boxing, but college and pro football. Basketball's on the horizon. Baseball, I still haven't gotten in, but I will get there. Nevertheless, I know why you're here. You know why you're here. You saw the thumbnail, and that thumbnail said, Oleksandr Usyk defeats Anthony Joshua again in their highly anticipated rematch in Saudi Arabia. Oleksandr Usyk takes on Anthony Joshua again, and he beats him again. A much more entertaining fight this time around, not as one-sided. And I'm here to just break it down just a little bit. It doesn't need a whole lot of breaking down if you've seen it. If you haven't seen it, I think you saw it on the internet and you probably heard enough to put something together and realize Anthony Joshua just cannot beat Usyk. It's that simple. He's not as good. He never has been as good as Usyk. And in my mind, surprise, surprise, he's not that good, period, in terms of being an elite of the elite. He's just a very good fighter in a very mediocre era of heavyweight boxing. But let's not take anything away from the people who've been doing their thing in the heavyweight division, specifically Oleksandr Usyk doing what he's done, which is more incredible than what Tyson Fury has done. Tyson Fury is a natural heavyweight. He's done what natural heavyweights should do. And if they're talented in a weak division, they dominate the division. He's done that. Oleksandr Usyk has moved up. He dominated the cruiserweights. He moved up in one of the biggest jumps you're going to make in boxing to the heavyweight division. And he's dominating there too. Dominating the top fighters, or at least some of the fighters considered the top fighters. Took his belt in London. Then he took him over to Saudi Arabia and kept his belt. Prevented Anthony Joshua from getting the belts back. The main event was complimented. Let me not even not mention this. The main event was complimented by a very entertaining and fun undercard. Now, let me get a little bit into the undercard that showed Caleb Smith was there, and you had Badou Jack. You had the 3-minute and 58-second round. Yeah, that. When Badou Jack took on Richard Rivera from the United States, they fought a 3-minute and 58-second round. That's crazy. I don't know if that's one of those things that happens because you're overseas in a country that's not used to having boxing, so things just go awry. But that's the most basic of basic when it comes to boxing. The timekeeper, that's your only job. Do it. So numbers are universal. So it's not like it's something that has to be translated, something you just don't know. You either know it's 3 minutes or you don't, and if you don't, you shouldn't be there. But that's what happened too. So I had to give a little shout out to the undercard because it was entertaining and it held my attention, at least, into the main event, which we all came from. Usyk is now the real world champ. And as I already had mentioned, the real world champ because he's beaten the guy who was supposed to be the best fighter outside of Tyson Fury on 2 different continents. Is that a world champion or not? He whoops you in your hometown, and he whoops you in someone else's hometown. And if they had a third fight, it would be in Ukraine. And with that war going on, we know Joshua would lose that too because he's just not the fighter that Usyk is. AJ is a solid fighter at best. And I'll tell you what, when he was coming up through the ranks, I wanted him to be that kind of sort of Mike Tyson figure. He had that physique, and it kind of took me. For somebody who's watched boxing and has been part of boxing for so long, the visual, the aesthetics took me. And I was like, this guy is built like Hercules. We need to have a champion like that. And I wished it was better for him. And then when he started getting hit, he started getting buzzed by guys who were sort of kind of mediocre. And I was like, uh-oh, I just hope that's a one-off. But typically in the heavyweight world, that isn't a one-off. That's who you are. But he did have talent. So it's not like AJ is without talent. He came to heavyweight boxing or boxing period late. He developed and they marketed him perfectly because it's more of a marketing campaign now than real substance, and we've seen it before our very eyes. Hey, it's not taking anything away from him. It's telling the truth about him. So I know there'll be people out there in the boxing world, maybe these UK fans who may think I'm hating. What's there to hate? If I'm an Usyk fan, there's nothing to hate. If I'm an AJ fan, well, I hate what happened against Usyk now 2 times in a row. Now, AJ, to his credit, he tried to right the ship. He got rid of his previous trainer. He came and got one of the great trainers from the United States, Robert Garcia, a former champion himself, who's been the trainer for his own brother, Mikey Garcia, who's a very excellent fighter. I think he's a Hall of Famer. I think he should be. But anyways, another argument for another day. But Robert Garcia took him along. Initially, I'll be honest, I thought it would be a mistake. The reason why Mexican-style boxing, that's not what AJ needed to do against Usyk. Mexican-style boxing would not have been the way to go with his conditioning issues and the skill set of Usyk, knowing how to fight, knowing how to maneuver, knowing the angles, all of those things where a really astute student of the game, which Usyk is, would have done, it would not have worked for Anthony Joshua. And I made a mistake thinking that Robert Garcia would not be able to change him into something more. But you know what? Boxing is universal. Yeah, the Mexican style of boxing is universal among Mexican fighters who choose to do so. But it's not because they don't have the ability. I mean, you look at somebody like Oscar De La Hoya, and he's just as skilled as any fighter who's ever fought. So it's not just a Mexican thing. It's just that that's the style they choose, and they believe they have their best chances at that. The ones who aren't as talented as De La Hoya or Julio Cesar Chavez, they try to grit it out. You know what? If I don't have the skills, I'll out-tough you, and then I'll let it catch up to you, and I'll win. And that's what I thought with Robert Garcia. I didn't think that he would be able to handle AJ with all of the retooling he had to have. And it proved me wrong, at least by the way AJ looked in the fight. Now, the other part of that is when I look at fighters who change trainers, I like for these types of fighters to get the new trainer, learn the new lessons, and then have a tune-up to see how it's working. Give a test drive to the trainer, the test drive in live action, the test drive to the new skill set, the weight loss that AJ had and the way he looked like a boxer now instead of a bodybuilder. I wanted to see how that looked before a fight with Usyk. But of course, ego gets in the way, money is there. So you want to go out and get it immediately. And I know a little pride was there. And that's why I believe the fight happened sooner than it should have happened. You want to test drive your training. You want to test drive all the new things you might have learned during these training camps. And regardless of the ridiculous scores, getting back to the fight, this fight was not close. It was a closer fight than the first, but it was not a close fight overall. If you looked at it and watched it, it was competitive, but still wasn't close. Usyk was the clear winner. I don't know what these judges were looking at in terms of giving Anthony Joshua more rounds than he deserved. One scorecard was right around the level, but it should not have been a split decision. But we've seen that in boxing before. And after the 3-minute and 58-second round, well, I guess having a scorecard wrong is something else. You had a British judge there. You had an American judge there. And I forgot what the other judge was from, but it doesn't even matter. I mean, seriously, because we got a bad scorecard, but the right guy won. So I am pleased with that. The fight, though, overall was an aesthetically pleasing fight. You got to see the skill set, not only of Usyk, but of Anthony Joshua. There's something there. He wasn't looking as robotic, even though he was a bit stiff, but I think he did have his conditioning on his mind. I think he did have, if I'm over-aggressive, I'm going to get tired, and Usyk, who's an Energizer Bunny, is going to get me in the later round. So he was a bit tentative, even when he had Usyk hurt, AJ. When he had Usyk hurt, a bit tentative. He didn't go for it completely, but he did come to life with those body shots. And Usyk did feel those body shots. And he did respond to feeling those body shots with feeling dizzy. And then when AJ went to the head, he was feeling even more dizzy. He was showing it physically showing that he did not like that. And why should he? He's finally getting hit consecutively by a real puncher who's a real heavyweight, not Chaz Weatherspoon, not guys like that. He's fighting AJ, and I'll say AJ is not that great, but he's still good and better than the lot that Usyk has fought as a heavyweight. So let's get that clear as well. But aesthetically pleasing because AJ was using his jab. You could see him thinking. You could see him doing things that he had not done in previous fights, bending at the knees, really using his jab with some authority in the early going. But as fights go, as boxing go, when you turn up that heat and you're not getting your desired result, you start falling apart mentally. And then when you fall apart mentally, that physical part becomes a problem. You start getting tired. You start getting a little bit more fatigued than you planned on, but you know you've been there before. And that's what AJ started feeling, in my opinion. And on the other hand, Usyk was so frenetic at times, AJ just mentally got worn down, I believe. And over the course of the fight, when he was responding early on to everything that Usyk had done in terms of countering, well, he stopped. And I think that had a lot to do with that, everything in his mind. I don't know what's next. I don't want to get tired. I don't want to get caught. But he was still getting caught. Not effectively like Usyk, I believe, could have done, but he was getting caught. And it was enough to cause trepidation and throwing more punches. And then the slower his punches came, the more he got countered. And then Usyk became a little bit more elusive, more like Vasily Jurov. And we saw even more of it. So it was a very entertaining fight. AJ came to apply the lessons that he had learned, and it gave us this result. He simply is not as good as Usyk. Usyk is the better fighter. Usyk is now the better athlete, as we've seen. And Usyk is outright just better than him, and only Tyson Fury is the only one with a question mark right now if Usyk were to fight him as a heavyweight. He's that good. He can go the 12 rounds. A lot of these heavyweights can't do it with a frenetic pace in between the rounds. You just can't do it. And, credit to Robert Garcia. I mean, I've always respected the man as a fighter and as a trainer. I respect the hell out of his brother Mikey. So it's not even a matter of saying that he just can't train. Boxing is still universal. You still throw the jab. You still throw the uppercut, the left hook, the right cross, the left cross if you're a southpaw. You still do those things. And so he put it together from the ground floor up. All of the things AJ already knew, it seemed like Robert Garcia really reinforced what he had already known and giving him a better way of delivering it. And it made him a better fighter, but he was just going against a guy who just has too much experience. I know 20 fight, that was his 20th fight, 21st fight. Look, if you've watched this channel and you've seen me break down boxing, you know this for sure. I'm always on the side of amateur experience, especially elite amateur experience. And when we're talking about these Eastern Bloc guys who are now fighting in professional boxing, you're talking about the elite of the elite as amateurs. We're talking about Usyk being 335-15 as an amateur. We're talking about Vasily Lomachenko being 396-1 as an amateur. These guys are as refined as you could possibly be. So when they're turning pro, they're just raising the amount of rounds. They're still, and they have to learn some of the nuances, like the more physical nature of the pro boxing scene and all of that. But outside of that, the skill set is already there. And if you have the records they have, wins and losses, when you fought everyone around the world, every style that can be brought to the table, you're just refined. There's nothing inferior fighter who's athletically inferior or inferior skill-wise. Nothing else they can do. Now, let's get to the final part of this fight. AJ's post-fight look was such a bad look. He gets up there WWE style and goes on some type of bizarre rant. And I think it was a byproduct of his mental exhaustion. After all of this fighting and all of this and still losing after saying all of these things, and I think they did say he was going to be aggressive just to get the other camp to think that. But I think all of that just came to a head when he got the laws. He just didn't know how to respond. So a little bit of that thug came out of him. Remember, he's not a church boy. He's not a choir boy. He's done things in his past, and he tried to mention those things as well. But then when he mentioned all-time greats like Jack Dempsey, Muhammad Ali, and Joe Louis, bro, where was he going with that? It went nowhere. They could have turned the mic off on him, but they decided not to do it. So what's next for Usyk? He says he only wants to fight Fury. If he's not fighting Fury, he's not fighting anymore. So I guess at his age also, I think 36 years old, he can retire. He's done everything you could possibly do in a short career. He can retire and be happy with himself. And he doesn't have to regret not fighting Fury. I don't believe he does. But I think a good fight would be even better if it's not Fury, would be Deontay Wilder. Yeah, he'll outbox Deontay left and right, but he'll eventually get hit. How does he respond? Because he did get a little dizzy when getting hit by AJ on occasion. a little dizzy, not buzzed completely, but a little dizzy, a little misstep, a little bit of trauma. Deontay Wilder can't box worth a lick, but he still can hit you. And if you outbox him for 12 rounds, kind of like Fury did in their first fight when he outboxed him for the majority of 10 rounds, and then when the championship rounds came, boom, pop with the weasel. And that's what made it a drawing and gave us the subsequent 2 more fights. The second fight and the third fight made, he couldn't do it again. But tell me what you think. Let me know what you think in the comments about this little tirade I just went on right now about this fight. It was a very good fight. Nothing great, very good. Something to hold us over until Canelo gets in there with Triple G and hopefully Spence and Crawford is made. Let me know what you think. I'm Trav with Yo Trav Sports Bag. Check us out, subscribe to the channel, do all that stuff. Give me some suggestions. What do you want? Until next time.